Hi guys, this is Connie. You see the remnants of baby bear. Somebody had a checkup with some shots and so it's been grouchy all day. Now that you are calm, let's get back to Connie reads Brian's Return. This is chapter 11. Dear Caleb, today I found out about plans and how they don't always work. There was a sudden crash to his side, so fast he hadn't heard any preliminary movement, and a white-tailed doe flew out of the brush to his right. She was a full 8 feet in the air when she left the brush, and billowing from her eyes were clouds of something that resembled smoke. Later, when he had time to think, he decided that flies and mosquitoes were attacking her eyes, and she was momentarily blinded. She was trying to make the water where she could put her head under and clear away the bugs. She landed almost exactly in the center of the canoe, nearly in Brian's lap, and she wanted out. Brian had read about a man who had accidentally hit a buck with his station wagon. The deer was knocked sideways and lay still in the ditch. The man stopped, thinking the deer was dead, and not wanting to waste the meat, he put the deer in the back of the station wagon. He'd gone about 4 miles when the deer, which was only stunned, came back to life. The man said it was like a bomb had gone off in the car. To save himself, he opened the door and bailed out with the car still moving. The deer kicked out every window, including the windshield, before it could get out and get away. Something close to that happened now to Brian. The doe landed half on her feet and half on her stomach across the canoe. Her head, which was over the side, went down in the water, and she thrashed around to raise it, probably thinking she was on a log of some kind, to find herself staring directly into Brian's eyes. It was impossible to say who was more surprised. Hey! Brian just had time to start when, with a lunge and a kick, the doe left the canoe. The problem was that her back feet caught the gunwale of the canoe and spun it like a cork. In a half second, Brian went from being upright with not a care in the world, thinking how wonderful and grand everything was, to being upside down, lungs full of water, tangled up in canoe gear, lily pads, and mud. Arrgh! He came up screaming and spitting mud and water. What? He still hadn't figured out quite what had happened, but it rapidly became clear as he saw the deer bounding up out of the water and away into the brush on the shore, while he stood waist deep, surrounded by arrows, bow, upside-down canoe, and packs still dry inside garbage bags. Nothing was seriously damaged. Nearby, on shore, was a small clearing 10 or 12 yards across. Brian grabbed the side of the canoe and dragged it up to the shore. He untied the packs and put them on the grass, along with his bow and arrows and the extra paddle. The equipment in the packs had been enclosed in plastic, but he had neglected to wrap his sleeping bag, so it was wet. Though not soaked through, it had been in its stow bag, and water seeped in only at the end. Still, it needed to be dried. Well, I guess, he said, looking around at the clearing. That's one way to find a camping spot. Yes, it is. It's one way to find a camping spot. He flipped the canoe and emptied it, pulled it up on the grass, and inverted it again. He spread his sleeping bag in the sun to dry and put his tent up. There were fish in the lily pads, and Brian put the line out with a bare hook, standing in the water up to his waist and fishing out around his legs. The hook was golden and flashed tiny bits of light. The fish bit without bait, and he took half a dozen hand-sized panfish. They were a mix of bluegills and a smaller brownish fish that seemed to be a cousin of a crab pie. Maybe some kind of rock bass? But they would taste fine. He cleaned and scaled them and put them in the large pan with fresh water. He gathered dried driftwood for half an hour and had plenty for the night. He started a fire and put the fish on one side of the fire, and then he put 1 cup of water in the small pot with half a cup of rice and put it on the other side of the flames. He had not eaten since the night before and would get a full meal for tonight. The fish boiled fast and was done in 15 minutes. The rice took about a half an hour. Brian picked the meat off the fish and put it in his metal cup until the rice was done. Then he added the fish and some salt to the rice. He ate with a spoon, cleaned the pot well, then boiled water in the large pot to fill his 2-quart canteen for the next day and furnish him with a cup of evening tea. While the water was boiling, he bear-proofed the camp, or did the best he could. He had read up on bears when he was back in civilization and knew that above all they were intelligent and unpredictable. To be secure, you had to get rid of all food smells. He buried the fish bones and skin well away from the camp area. He then tied the end of a piece of nylon rope to a stick to give it weight and lobbed it over a limb 30 feet up in a nearby birch. He tied both his packs to the line and then pulled them up 15 feet in the air and then snubbed the line off. A smart bear might know how to chew the rope off and drop the packs, but he doubted there were many that intelligent around. His sleeping bag was dry, and he put it in the tent, then sat by the fire sipping hot tea with a sugar cube while he checked his bow. The string was well waxed, and the water had not penetrated it. The bow itself was finished with a varnish that was waterproof. The arrows were a different story. They were made of bare wood. He hadn't bothered to paint them or varnish the shafts, and the feathers had become soaked. He checked each shaft carefully to make certain it was still straight, found 2 that were slightly off, and bent them gently until they were straight while holding them to the heat. All this knowledge came from the books he'd read on old-time archery. He then carefully held each arrow so that heat from the fire dried the feathers without curling them. It was a painstaking process, and he took his time, listening to the crackle of the fire, adding a stick or 2 now and then, and becoming more and more aware of the night woods around him. You're okay. There you are. The forest was alive, for the woods became more active in the dark. Many predators were nocturnal. It was easier to catch prey then, though many prey animals like mice and rabbits moved in the dark because they felt safer. Brian heard 100 rustlings, rubbings, breaking of small twigs, brushing of hair against leaves. There, he thought, was a squirrel moving through trees, and there was a mouse or a rabbit moving over the forest floor. It was hard to tell them apart. Suddenly, he heard a scream, far off, as a rabbit was caught and died. It sounded almost human, baby-like, very much like the sound of the baby doll makes when it's tipped over. He heard it twice, and then the rabbit was gone, into a wolf or fox or skunk or weasel, perhaps even an owl. Rabbits and mice were often bottom of the food chain in the woods. Everybody ate them, and he heard screams twice more. 3 dead rabbits. As he held an arrow to the heat to let his mind play with the numbers, 3 dead rabbits in an hour. He could probably only hear them scream from a couple of 100 yards, say a quarter of a square mile around him, which meant that perhaps 6 rabbits an hour were killed in every square mile of wilderness at night. And yet there were still hundreds, thousands of rabbits running loose, so many that in winter they left small highways packed so hard they could hold a human up in the snow. He shook his head. Wasted thought. There were rabbits. They were good to eat. He had eaten many of them. He would eat many more. It was enough. It was late, and the moon was up. When he finished drying the arrows and quiver, he put the fire out and took his weapons and bow into the tent. He was suffering a kind of jet lag, the shock of coming from civilization to the bush, and he was very tired. He crawled into his bag, arranged the knife and hatchet and bow and arrows near his head, and leaned back and down to sleep. It was a few minutes coming. He lay listening to the woods, thinking of the day. He hadn't planned to camp here. On the map, it was only a few miles to the next lake, and he thought he'd go there before camping. But the doe had come along and changed all his plans. She had picked the campsite for him, he thought, smiling, as sleep came over him and he closed his eyes and let the day slip away. And that was chapter 11. I hope that the grunting of little baby bear Tryon didn't distract you too much. Be careful with that and enjoy, please and thank you, and I will see you for the next chapter. Bye.